Chapter 23 of She. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Red Abris. She by H. Rider Haggard. The Temple of Truth. Our preparations did not take us very long. We put a change of clothing apiece and some spare boots into my Gladstone bag. Also, we took our revolvers and an express rifle each, together with a good supply of ammunition, a precaution to which, under Providence, we subsequently owed our lives over and over again. The rest of our gear, together with our heavy rifles, we left behind us. A few minutes before the appointed time, we once more attended in Asha's boudoir, and found her also ready, her dark cloak thrown over her winding sheet like wrappings. "Are you prepared for the great venture?" she said. "We are," I answered, "though for my part, Asha, I have no faith in it." "Ah, my holy," she said, "thou art of a truth like those old Jews, of whom the memory vexes me so sorely, unbelieving, and hard to accept that which they have not known. But thou shalt see, for unless my mirror beyond lies," and she pointed to the fount of crystal water, "the path is yet open as it was of old time. And now let us start upon the new life which shall end, who knoweth where?" "Ah," I echoed, "who knoweth where?" And we passed down into the great central cave, and out into the light of day. At the mouth of the cave we found a single litter with 6 bearers, all of them mutes, waiting, and with them I was relieved to see our old friend Bilali, for whom I had conceived a sort of affection. It appeared that, for reasons not necessary to explain at length, Asha had thought it best that, with the exception of herself, we should proceed on foot, and this we were nothing loth to do. After our long confinement in these caves, which, however suitable they might be for sarcophagi, a singularly inappropriate word, by the way, for these particular tombs, which certainly did not consume the bodies given to their keeping, were depressing habitations for breathing mortals like ourselves. Either by accident or by the orders of She, the space in front of the cave where we had beheld that awful dance was perfectly clear of spectators. Not a soul was to be seen, and consequently I do not believe that our departure was known to anybody, except perhaps the mutes who waited on She, and they were, of course, in the habit of keeping what they saw to themselves. In a few minutes' time we were stepping out sharply across the great cultivated plain or lake bed, framed like a vast emerald in its setting of frowning cliff, and had another opportunity of wondering at the extraordinary nature of the site chosen by these old people of Kor for their capital, and at the marvelous amount of labor, ingenuity, and engineering skill that must have been brought into requisition by the founders of the city to drain so huge a sheet of water, and to keep it clear of subsequent accumulations. It is indeed, so far as my experience goes, an unequalled instance of what man can do in the face of nature. For, in my opinion, such achievements as the Suez Canal or even the Mount Cenis Tunnel do not approach this ancient undertaking in magnitude and grandeur of conception. When we had been walking for about half an hour, enjoying ourselves exceedingly in the delightful cool which about this time of the day always appeared to descend upon the great plain of Kor, and which, in some degree, atoned for the want of any land or sea breeze, for all wind was kept off by the rocky mountain wall, we began to get a clear view of what Bilali had informed us were the ruins of the great city. And even from that distance we could see how wonderful those ruins were, a fact which with every step we took became more evident. The town was not very large if compared to Babylon or Thebes, or other cities of remote antiquity. Perhaps its outer wall contained some 12 square miles of ground, or a little more. Nor had the walls, so far as we could judge when we reached them, been very high, probably not more than 40 feet, which was about their present height where they had not, through the sinking of the ground or some such cause, fallen into ruin. The reason of this, no doubt, was that the people of Kar, being protected from any outside attack by far more tremendous ramparts than any that the hand of man could rear, only required them for show and to guard against civil discord. But on the other hand, they were as broad as they were high, but entirely of dressed stone, hewn, no doubt, from the vast caves, and surrounded by a great moat about 60 feet in width, some reaches of which were still filled with water. About 10 minutes before the sun finally sank, we reached this moat, and passed down and through it, clambering across what evidently were the piled up fragments of a great bridge in order to do so, and then with some little difficulty over the slope of the wall to its summit. I wish that it lay within the power of my pen to give some idea of the grandeur of the sight that then met our view. There, all bathed in the red glow of the sinking sun, were miles upon miles of ruins, columns, temples, shrines, and the palaces of kings, varied with patches of green bush. Of course, the roofs of these buildings had long since fallen into decay and vanished, but owing to the extreme massiveness of the style of building, and to the hardness and durability of the rock employed, most of the party walls and great columns still remained standing. In connection with the extraordinary state of preservation of these ruins after so vast a lapse of time, at least 6,000 years, it must be remembered that Kor was not burnt or destroyed by an enemy or an earthquake, but deserted owing to the action of a terrible plague. Consequently, the houses were left unharmed. Also, the climate of the plain is remarkably fine and dry, and there is very little rain or wind, as a result of which these relics have only to contend against the unaided action of time, that works but slowly upon such massive blocks of masonry. L.H.H. Straight before us stretched away what had evidently been the main thoroughfare of the city, for it was very wide, wider than the Thames embankment, and regular, being, as we afterwards discovered, paved, or rather built throughout of blocks of dressed stone, such as were employed in the walls. It was but little overgrown even now with grass and shrubs that could get no depth of soil to live in. What had been the parks and gardens, on the contrary, were now dense jungle. Indeed, it was easy even from a distance to trace the course of the various roads by the burnt up appearance of the scanty grass that grew upon them. On either side of this great thoroughfare were vast blocks of ruins, each block, generally speaking, being separated from its neighbor by a space of what had once, I suppose, been garden ground, but was now dense and tangled bush. They were all built of the same colored stone, and most of them had pillars, which was as much as we could make out in the fading light as we passed swiftly up the main road, that I believe I am right in saying no living foot had pressed for thousands of years. Bilali told me that the Amahagger believe that the site of the city is haunted, and could not be persuaded to enter it upon any consideration. Indeed, I could see that he himself did not at all like doing so, and was only consoled by the reflection that he was under the direct protection of she. It struck Leo and myself as very curious that a people which has no objection to living amongst the dead, with whom their familiarity has perhaps bred contempt, and even using their bodies for purpose of fuel, should be terrified at approaching the habitations that these very departed had occupied when alive. After all, however, it is only a savage inconsistency. L.H.H. Presently we came to an enormous pile, which we rightly took to be a temple covering at least 8 acres of ground, and apparently arranged in a series of courts, each one enclosing another of smaller size, on the principle of a Chinese nest of boxes, the courts being separated one from the other by rows of huge columns. And while I think of it, I may as well state a remarkable thing about the shape of these columns, which resembled none that I have ever seen or heard of, being fashioned with a kind of waist at the center, and swelling out above and below. At first we thought that this shape was meant to roughly symbolize or suggest the female form, as was a common habit amongst the ancient religious architects of many creeds. On the following day, however, as we went up the slopes of the mountain, we discovered a large quantity of the most stately looking palms, of which the trunks grew exactly in this shape, and I have now no doubt that the first designer of those columns drew his inspiration from the graceful bends of those very palms, or rather of their ancestors, which then, some 8 or 10,000 years ago, as now, beautified the slopes of the mountain that had once formed the shores of the volcanic lake. At the facade of this huge temple, which I should imagine is almost as large as that of El Karnak at the Thebes, some of the largest columns which I measured being between 18 to 20 feet in diameter at the base, by about 70 feet in height, our little procession was halted, and Asha descended from her litter. "There was a spot here, Callicrates," she said to Leo, who had run up to help her down, "where one might sleep. 2,000 years ago did thou and I and that Egyptian asp rest therein. But since then have I not set foot here, nor any man, and perchance it has fallen." And followed by the rest of us, she passed up a vast flight of broken and ruined steps into the outer court, and looked round into the gloom. Presently she seemed to recollect, and, walking a few paces along the wall to the left, halted. "It is here," she said, and at the same time beckoned to the two mutes, who were loaded with provisions and our little belongings, to advance. One of them came forward, and producing a lamp, lit it from his brazier, for the Amahagger, when on a journey, nearly always carried with them a little lighted brazier from which to provide fire. The tinder of this brazier was made of broken fragments of mummy carefully damped, and if the admixture of moisture was properly managed, this unholy compound would smoulder away for hours. After all, we are not much in advance of the Amhagar in these matters. Mummy, that is pounded ancient Egyptian, is, I believe, a pigment much used by artists, and especially by those of them who direct their talents to the reproduction of the works of the old masters. Editor. As soon as the lamp was lit, we entered the place before which Asha had halted. It turned out to be a chamber hollowed in the thickness of the wall, and from the fact of there still being a massive stone table in it, I should think that it had probably served as a living room, perhaps for one of the doorkeepers of the great temple. Here we stopped, and after cleaning the place out and making it as comfortable as circumstances and the darkness would permit, we ate some cold meat. At least Leo, Job, and I did, for Asha, as I think I have said elsewhere, never touched anything except cakes of flour, fruit, and water. While we were still eating, the moon, which was at her full, rose above the mountain wall, and began to flood the place with silver. "What ye, why I have brought you here tonight, my holy?" said Asha, leaning her head upon her hand and watching the great orb as she rose, like some heavenly queen, above the solemn pillars of the temple. "I brought you, nay, it is strange, but knowest thou, Callicrates, that thou liest at this moment upon the very spot where thy dead body lay when I bore thee back to those caves of Kor so many years ago? It all returns to my mind now. I can see it, and horrible is it to my sight." And she shuddered. Here Leo jumped up and hastily changed his seat. However the reminiscence might affect Asha, it clearly had few charms for him. "I brought you," went on Asha presently, "that you might look upon the most wonderful sight that ever the eye of man beheld, the full moon shining over ruined Kor. When you have done your eating, I would that I could teach you to eat naught but fruit, Callicrates, but that will come after thou hast laved in the fire. Once I too ate flesh like a brute beast. When you have done, we will go out, and I will show you this great temple and the God whom men once worshipped therein." Of course we got up at once and started, and here again my pen fails me. To give a string of measurements and details of the various courts of the temple would only be wearisome, supposing that I had them, and yet I know not how I am to describe what we saw, magnificent as it was even in its ruin, almost beyond the power of realization. Court upon dim court, row upon row of mighty pillars, some of them, especially at the gateways, sculptured from pedestal to capital, space upon space of empty chambers that spoke more eloquently to the imagination than any crowded streets, and over all The dead silence of the dead, the sense of utter loneliness, and the brooding spirit of the past. How beautiful it was, and yet how dear! We did not dare to speak aloud. Asha herself was awed in the presence of an antiquity compared to which even her length of days was but a little thing. We only whispered, and our whispers seemed to run from column to column till they were lost in the quiet air. Bright fell the moonlight on pillar and court and shattered wall, hiding all their rents and imperfections in its silver garment, and clothing their hoar majesty with the peculiar glory of the night. It was a wonderful sight to see the full moon looking down on the ruined fane of Kor. It was a wonderful thing to think for how many thousands of years the dead orb above and the dead city below had gazed thus upon each other, and in the utter solitude of space poured forth, each to each, the tale of their lost life and long departed glory. The white light fell, and minute by minute the quiet shadows crept across the grass grown courts like the spirits of old priests haunting the habitations of their worship. The white light fell, and the long shadows grew, till the beauty and grandeur of each scene and the untamed majesty of its present death seemed to sink into our very souls, and speak more loudly than the shouts of armies concerning the pomp and splendor that the grave had swallowed and even memory had forgotten. "Come," said Asha, after we had gazed and gazed, I know not for how long, "and I will show you the stony flower of loveliness and wonder's very crown, if yet it stands to mock time with its beauty and fill the heart of man with longing for that which is behind the veil." And without waiting for an answer, she led us through two more pillared courts into the inner shrine of the old fane. And there, in the center of the inmost court, that might have been some 50 yards square, or a little more, we stood face to face with what is perhaps the grandest allegorical work of art that the genius of our children has ever given to the world. For in the exact center of the court, placed upon a thick square slab of rock, was a huge round ball of dark stone, some 20 feet in diameter, and standing on the ball was a colossal winged figure of a beauty so entrancing and divine that when I first gazed upon it, illuminated and shadowed as it was by the soft light of the moon, my breath stood still, and for an instant my heart ceased its beating. The statue was hewn from marble, so pure and white that even now, after all those ages, it shone as the moonbeams danced upon it, and its height was, I should say, a trifle over 20 feet. It was the winged figure of a woman of such marvelous loveliness and delicacy of form that the size seemed rather to add than to detract from its so human and yet more spiritual beauty. She was bending forward and poising herself upon her half spread wings, as though to preserve her balance as she leaned. Her arms were outstretched like those of some woman about to embrace one she dearly loved, while her whole attitude gave an impression of the tenderest beseeching. Her perfect and most gracious form was naked, save, and here came the extraordinary thing, the face, which was thinly veiled, so that we could only trace the marking of her features. A gauzy veil was thrown round and about the head, and of its two ends one fell across her left breast, which was outlined beneath it, and one, now broken, streamed away upon the air behind her. "Who is she?" I asked, as soon as I could take my eyes off the statue. "Canst thou not guess, O holy?" answered Asha. "Where then is thy imagination? It is truth standing on the world, and calling to its children to unveil her face. See what is writ upon the pedestal. Without doubt it is taken from the book of scriptures of these men of Kor." And she led the way to the foot of the statue, where an inscription of the usual Chinese looking hieroglyphics was so deeply graven as to be still quite legible, at least to Asha. According to her translation it ran thus: "Is there no man that will draw my veil and look upon my face, for it is very fair? Unto him who draws my veil shall I be, and peace will I give him, and sweet children of knowledge and good works." And a voice cried, "Though all those who seek after thee desire thee, behold, virgin art thou, and virgin shalt thou go till time be done. No man is there born of woman who may draw thy wheel and live, nor shall be. By death only can thy wheel be drawn, O Truth. And Truth stretched out her arms and wept, because those who sought her might not find her, nor look upon her face to face. Thou seest, said Asha, when she had finished translating. Truth was the goddess of the people of Old Kor, and to her they built their shrines, and her they sought, knowing that they should never find, still sought they. And so, I added sadly, do men seek to this very hour, but they find out, and as this scripture saith, nor shall they, for in death only is truth found. Then, with one more look at this veiled and spiritualized loveliness, which was so perfect and so pure that one might almost fancy that the light of a living spirit shone through the marble prison to lead man on to high and ethereal thoughts, this poet's dream of beauty frozen into stone, which I shall never forget while I live, we turned and went back through the vast moonlit courts to the spot whence we had started. I never saw the statue again, which I the more regret, because on the great ball of stone representing the world whereon the figure stood, lines were drawn, that probably had there been light enough we should have discovered to be a map of the universe as it was known to the people of Kor. It is at any rate suggestive of some scientific knowledge that these long dead worshippers of truth had recognized the fact that the globe is round. End of chapter 23. Recording by Red Abras, January 2008.